Good evening, everyone. Nyama, Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Gulyin, Gunganyinu Bik Wenawap Darabandari, Nyariyana Nyanga Bik Ban Ba Nyagu, Gagukan Nangit Bambuth Yalingbu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, traditional owners of the lands on which Darebin Council stands. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Mr Nugent, I notice you have your hand in the air. There's no public question time tonight, as per the governance local law. Mr Nugent, I'm sorry, this is the rules around the governance local law are quite clear. This is not a new process, this is the same as it has always been. I might ask Mr Mann to just spell out what those rules are.
Madam Mayor, the meeting tonight is a special council meeting to place the council's draft budget on exhibition. Submissions and public questions are permitted at ordinary council meetings, and specifically the governance local law outlines that that's only when they can be submitted. So this agenda has one item on it, and the Local Government Act, in addition to the governance local law, is quite explicit in saying that the only matters that can be dealt with at a special council meeting are those matters that are listed on the agenda. So all we are doing tonight is discussing the draft budget and a recommendation to place it on exhibition when we invite submissions from the community over the next 28 days.
Thank you, Mr Mann. I would like to also state that I am more than happy to stay after the meeting and speak to anyone individually who feels that they might be missing out on that opportunity. Councillor Greco?
Mayor Reddy, I'd just like to ask a question. Just on the basis of what the officer just said, why was the meeting therefore called as a special meeting, and that then doesn't provide for questions and submissions to be presented here tonight? So could I get some understanding from officers why we have called for a special meeting tonight, when I've noticed that in the past 2 years, the draft budget and the final budget have always been considered at ordinary meetings where people could ask questions and provide submissions?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Greco. Mr Mann?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it's my belief that the timing of this meeting, in terms of holding it on a special meeting, was primarily due to the adjusted timing to get the budget adopted, purely that reason. I would make the point, though, through you, Mayor Rennie, that we have received a number of questions today, I think at least a dozen or so that were received through the online system, and we've responded to all those people and advised them that those questions and submissions on the draft budget, we will consider those as submissions to the budget process and deal with them in that way.
Thank you, Mr Mann. Councillor Greco?
Mayor Reddy, look, just on the basis of what we've heard, and given that there are people here in the gallery wanting to ask questions and wanting to make submissions, I want to move a procedural motion that we defer this business item till we hear the questions and submissions from our members of the gallery. So I put that motion that we, a procedural motion that we defer till we give the members of the gallery an opportunity to ask their questions and make their submissions in relation to the draft budget.
Thank you.
And I'm seeking a seconder for that
procedural motion. I believe that would need to have... I'll ask Mr Mann to just comment on that in relation to the governance local law.
Sure, Mayor Rennie. We'd require a seconder for that motion, but the procedural motion would be the matter be deferred to another time later in the meeting. However, through you, Mayor, the reality is that the governance local law and the Act are quite clear, and that questions cannot be taken and dealt with at this meeting tonight. So,
I'm happy to second the motion.
Okay. Councillor Greco has put a procedural motion. All those in favour?
Sorry, can we check the rules around this procedural motion because they're different for each procedural motion?
Thank you, Councillor Lasserve. Deferral of an item of business. You questioning whether we should have some debate on that?
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't have a
It's required to have a debate on it. Mayor Rennie?
I'm reading the governance local law. It does in fact say that there may be debate but only on the reasons for deferral and there is no right of reply. So that's very narrow focus of debate. And I'll just confirm that with Mr Mann.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, deferral of this item of business requires a seconder. Sorry, deferral of this item of business requires a seconder, and there can be debate, but it's limited to the reasons for the deferral, and there's no right of reply. And I think that's the situation with regard to the hearing of this matter.
Okay, I suggest that we just proceed on that basis. So we have a seconder.
Sorry to interrupt again. Another procedural matter. The motion needs to state when the item will be considered, and I don't think I heard exactly when that item would be considered, unless I missed it. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserve.
Just clarify, it will be considered after we hear all the submissions and all the questions by members of the gallery tonight. So
again, on a procedural matter, we won't be able to do that within a public meeting. So is the proposal that we defer it to today and specify a time and close this meeting and then not have, and then, like, I'm not sure what the...
Thank you, Councillor Lasserve. I understand. I'm getting some different advice. So, Mr Mann.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, as I've advised, and I'll try and be more explicit, there's no provision at this meeting to deal with public questions or submissions on the item on the agenda. That's consistent with the local law and the Local Government Act. So that's point one. The procedural motion to defer this matter until a later time in the meeting, in the context of hearing submissions and questions, it's problematic because we can't hear questions and submissions. So your, I guess, judgment about accepting that deferral motion on those conditions, on that reason, I think perhaps the appropriate thing is to hear the debate and make the decision. But the reality is we can't hear questions and submissions on this matter.
So can I make sure that I understand correctly? We could vote to defer the item in front of us, but even if we defer it, we cannot hear questions and submissions.
That's right. That's right. Okay. You could defer it to another time, another evening, and however, to defer it to later in the meeting to hear questions, we can't hear questions and submissions this evening.
Thank you, Mr Mann. On that,
I would then modify my procedural motion that I seek a procedural motion, therefore, to adjourn the debate so that we can hear the questions and submissions before Council considers the proposed draft budget. If that helps, in order for us to at least hear the questions, hear the submissions, to inform us before we actually debate the issue.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I don't think adjourning or deferring are fundamentally different things. I'll just seek advice from Mr Mann. I think our problem is that the rules in relation to a special council meeting prohibit submissions and questions, regardless of whether we adjourn or defer while we're in a meeting. So, Mr. Mann, can you confirm or clarify that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. At this meeting this evening, we cannot consider questions and submissions on the draft budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. I would like to reassure members of the community that the purposes of putting a budget out on exhibition is quite explicitly to go and seek feedback on that budget. So the whole process that we're going through tonight is in order to put a draft budget before the community with the explicit expectation that community members will then ask questions, make submissions, that there will be a hearing of submissions process, which is a public process like this, which is the explicit time which has been created to actually get your feedback on the budget. So we're not in any way trying not to hear that feedback. We're saying there will be a process and a particular meeting to actually hear any concerns, thoughts or feedback that you have in relation to the budget. Councillor Greco, thank you. I appreciate what you were trying to do, but the advice that I've received is quite clear, so I suggest that we continue on. I would like to note that we have an apology from Councillor Tim Lawrence for tonight's meeting. Councillors, does anyone have a conflict of interest in relation to the agenda tonight? No, there are no conflicts of interest to note. I'd like to welcome everyone, and particularly those who have come out, members of the public, to watch the proceedings tonight. I know that in this time of COVID-19 that's a significant commitment to following the affairs and to actually participating or listening to the debate here. Before we begin, I would like to set out my expectations in regard to our behaviour and to remind councillors of our obligations under the Code of Conduct. At Darebin, we pride ourselves on being a progressive and contemporary council, and in the interests of demonstrating exemplary leadership, I have high expectations that we will all be professional in our conduct throughout the evening and respectful in our debate. It is important for both councillors and the community to remember that our council is both a workplace and a public space, and that we have obligations to ensure that the working environment is safe for everyone, both emotionally and physically. I want to be clear that I won't tolerate any form of personal acrimony or insult, grandstanding or yelling, nor will I put up with talking over the top of one another or any use of unreasonable or impolite language or interjections from the gallery. I expect there will be some hearty debate tonight, so I would ask everyone to direct their questions and comments through me as the chair, and I'll endeavour to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to contribute. Thank you. So we'll now move on to consideration of reports, and the first item is item 4.1. I'll ask our managers to come up and respond to any questions before we enter debate. I'd also like to remind councillors in terms of how we operate tonight that once debate has begun, there are no further opportunities to ask questions. Having said that, there will be an opportunity to ask a question if somebody proposes a motion or amendment which is different to the one that has been circulated in the report, to make sure that people are clear and have an opportunity to ask any questions related to what we are going to enter debate on. Are there any questions before we begin? Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie. My first question is in relation to the federal government budget. When was it due to be delivered, and when has it been postponed to? And the same question for the state, and then followed by the council budget.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Damien?
Through you, Madam Mayor. I believe the federal budget was due to be delivered in May and has been pushed back to October. And I believe that's the same with the state budget. It was due to be delivered in May and has been pushed back to either September, October. I'm not 100% sure. With our budget, pre-COVID, we were looking at adopting the draft budget on the 25th of March with the view after the exhibition process to adopt the budget on the 18th of May.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Messina. Are there other questions? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. My question relates to why have capital works projects been significantly cut back in this proposed draft budget?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The capital works projects have been reduced due to the fact of the operating surplus that we're budgeting for now. So pre-COVID, councillors may recall that we were looking at an operating surplus of around $11 million. Due to the recovery package of $10.3 million that we're looking at for the community for this financial year and next financial year, our operating surplus has reduced to $3.7 million. Now, councillors, the operating surplus that we budget for each year goes towards funding the capital works program. So as operating surplus has decreased by just around $10 million, it means we've got less money to fund our capital works program. So that's the reason why we've reduced our capital works program.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
If I can ask, can the officers please specify what capital works projects have been cut as a result of the diminishing the capital works program this year?
Mr Hewitt.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Officers are preparing a report for Council, I think for the 9th of June, in time for deliberations for this budget, which will outline all of the projects which are no longer in the Council's capital works program and the reasons why. So you'll have that, I think, on the 9th of June.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Just further questions. Just wanted to know, given that we've got a surplus of $3.7 million that's proposed tonight, and as it's been stated, that surplus goes towards capital works in future years, why aren't we spending that $3.7 million surplus this year on capital works?
Mr Hogan.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the $3.7 million surplus is going towards the 2021 capital works program. That's already been allocated towards the $34 million capital works program.
Just a clarification in relation to that. My understanding that the $3.7 million surplus goes towards accumulated funds in the balance sheet. My question is, this year we have a $3.7 million surplus, and why has not that surplus been considered to be used for capital works in the following financial year?
Mr Hogan.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the 3.7 has been considered and has been used towards the capital works program. If we were to reduce that operating surplus, it would mean that it'd be less money that could go towards the capital works program.
Councillors, are there further questions? No? Thank you for that. I'll now ask if anyone has a motion they'd like to move. Councillor Amir.
I'd like to move the motion as printed in the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Lassurf. Thank you. Councillor Amir.
So as we all know, it's a really, is that Mike, okay? Really challenging time for everyone, for the community, for all organisations in Darebin, and of course for Darebin Council itself. And I wanted to start off by saying thank you to the staff who have worked so hard to not just put the budget together, but the whole new program of services that we're now delivering in this pandemic era. It's pretty rare that council's required to make not one but two budgets in as many months, so I wanted to say thank you for all the hard work. So in the last few months since the arrival of COVID-19, council has been working really hard, focusing on supporting people to have the basics, so doing thousands of meal deliveries, increasing our homelessness outreach programs, supporting people so that they have what they need for health, for mental health, to stay alive and stay connected as much as possible at the moment. This is something that continues to be a major focus in the budget in front of us, and that's something that I'm really proud of. The package that we've got is bigger than almost any other council in Victoria, and so far we've been able to deliver this without the loss of any staff at Darebin, and we hope this can continue. Again, that's something that's unusual in the local government sector. We've also, in this budget, despite the challenges, are continuing on with our flagship programs and infrastructure, including the development of the Northcote Aquatic Centre, Reservoir Leisure Centre and Multi-Sport Stadium. We know this is really important to people who have been waiting for decades for these three projects to happen, that will continue. And I get many messages from residents and people in the community more broadly saying we need to keep infrastructure going, we need to continue to be having jobs and make things happen. We also have in this budget ongoing services that have been continuing, or the immunisations, some of the library services, of course, tree planting, park maintenance, roads, footpaths, waste collection. Of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 12 months, and we know we're in a challenging financial position with so many residents hit so hard by job losses. That's why it's been so important for us to make sure that people, if they can't afford to pay their rates, whether that's their individual person, household or business, that can be deferred for a full year. What that means, however, is that we don't know what the next 12 months will bring. I am confident that what we've seen in the last couple of months is this organisation respond so quickly, so strongly, with people working so hard to make sure that residents continue to have the services they need to live a good life. And I feel confident that with this budget we can continue that.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Lassurf.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie, and I concur with Councillor Amir's contribution to this debate. Putting together budgets is difficult at the best of times, and I think that we've all felt the impact of trying to balance the needs of our community with the income that we'll be receiving over the next year. And I really want to commend officers for the work that they have done in basically building budgets over and over again once they get new information in around what's expected. And as a council officer myself, I guess, I'm on the other side doing that as well, and it has a significant impact, I think, on the staff and thinking about the future program for their work over the next year. So I want to, I guess, especially thank them for their work on this. What I will say is that this is about balancing many things, as most budgets are. We don't know how many people out there who will be in a position to pay their rates throughout the next year and who will be taking up our hardship policy. And I think the officers have done a good job at trying to forecast this. And as a result, this has flow-on impacts on what we can actually do in terms of expenditure, in terms of capital works, in terms of delivering projects that we would have liked to have delivered. I think that there is also, obviously, as Councillor Amir said, a really extensive package to support our community directly during the hardship that they may be experiencing through different additional emergency relief services, support to business. This needs to be balanced with actually being able to stimulate local jobs in our local economy through a capital works program. And I am pleased to see that we have retained some of our big projects that will actually result in a number of local jobs on the ground, giving people work here in our community. I am also, I guess, disappointed in having to give up some of the things that we would have liked to have seen, but hopefully these things can be picked up in future years.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Councillor Gueco.
I'd like to move an amendment.
Certainly, I believe you've circulated that. It's the first amendment. Okay, thank you. We'll get that up on the screen. Councillor Gueco, I'll get you to read that out as well in case there's someone who's not able to see that.
I'll read it out, thank you, yeah. That we endorse the recommendations in the report, subject to the following changes. That Council does not increase rates by 2%. B, fees and charges for residents in receipt of the JobKeeper job seeker schemes and concessional card holders not be increased and remain frozen at the 2019-2020 levels in view of the coronavirus crisis. C, that the pensioner rate rebate be increased by $50 to $200 to reflect rises in inflation over the last 6 years since the rebate was last increased. And D, final point, that Council matches dollar for dollar the special rate charges applying to ratepayers of the 4 Darebin Traders Association.
Thank you for that amendment, Councillor Greco. Before I seek a seconder, I'll ask all councillors if they have any questions in relation to the amendment. Councillor Amir.
In relation to B, through you, Mayor Rennie, I was wondering, so I understand that we do have a number of fees and charges that have already been frozen and no longer apply both for individuals and businesses. Could we get a bit more information about that, what's already been waived?
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Mr Hogan.
Through you, Madam Rennie, with the waiving that we're looking at over the next 12 months, there's a saving of just over $1 million in waiving of fees for traders, fees that they pay for sporting facilities, that leases, ground rental. I'm just looking at there's another one there. Yes, so those fees have been waived until 30 June 21. So all up, it's about $1 million, just over $1 million worth of fees to businesses that have been waived.
Thank you, Mr Hogan. Further questions? Councillor Messina.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I'd like some clarification in relation to item number D. Have we not passed an earlier notice of motion at a previous council in terms of the 2 trader associations at least? Can I have some clarity of what we actually have approved in the chamber prior to this evening?
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Mr Hogan.
Through you, Madam Rennie, as far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of the resolution. We have to get a copy of that.
Mr Mann might have a record of it. Or not?
Not to hand, Mayor Rennie.
If through you, Mayor Rennie, we did discuss it at a briefing and officers provided councillors with a reason as to why we wouldn't be supporting matching it dollar for dollar on the special rates. So up to the 6 months, up to the 30th of June, there was an absorption of costs of approximately $175,000. If we were to roll that out over a 12-month period, the cost of matching it and absorbing it was up to just over $700,000. Officers felt that through the Community and Economic Development Program, which forms part of the overarching community and business resilience and recovery package, there is significant support being applied to businesses in many, many ways as a result of hundreds and hundreds of different individual pieces of feedback from the business sector into how council can support them. So that is the reason why officers recommended that we wouldn't support matching dollar for dollar the special rate charges.
Thank you, Ms Bishop. Councillors, are there further questions? There being none, I'll seek a seconder for Councillor Greco's motion. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, I'm putting forward this amendment to the recommendation is that, councillors, it's really, we're living in extraordinary times. And what we're seeing is the biggest economic impact on our society since the last Great Depression. That's a big statement, councillors. And we can't have an approach which is just business as usual, almost business as usual. And all people that I have spoken to that have communicated with me have said that they find it absolutely absurd that the council is considering increasing rates by 2% at this particular time when people are hurting in the community. And that's why, councillors, I am suggesting that we do not increase the rates by 2% this time, and that we freeze the rates at last year's level in order to provide some real rate relief to the community, which is hurting at the moment. And if I could go through the specifics of my amendment, also in relation to fees and charges, there are many people in our community that are receiving the JobKeeper or the Job Seeker allowance because of the devastation in their income. And also we have concession card holders that also are feeling the pinch of the coronavirus crisis. And so again, people have said to me it's absurd that council is considering increasing fees and charges in the normal business way. And when I went through the fees and charges, I even saw that, for example, dog and cat registrations are going to increase by about 20% in the next financial year. Also, the pensioner rate rebate. Pensioners receive a rebate of $150 from council. They also receive a state government rebate. That rebate has not increased, councillors, for the last 5 or 6 years since it was last increased from $100 to $150. So it's actually losing value in terms of the cost of money when you factor in inflation. And again, that we should. And then coming to the final point, councillors, traders are looking for some sort of relief. And what I'm suggesting there is a dollar-for-dollar match with the special rates so that traders can use that money, that additional money, for promotion and of their shopping strips in order to bring customers back to their shopping strips as a result of the coronavirus. And given that we're going to be easing the coronavirus restrictions...
10 seconds.
Traders are desperately looking for some real practical advice and relief from council.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. With the increase of the 2% rates is concerning, considering that we're in uncharted waters. We have a lot of families who are homeschooling. We have families who are just home due to loss of their jobs. And in a lot of cases, we have a lot of traders, business traders who are home also, which is increasing their electricity, their gas, phone bills, gas bills, and now we throw a slap in the face, we give them a 2% increase in rates. Now, I know that it's great that we can offer them that they can prolong and don't have to pay their rates until the following year. However, they still have to pay it, is the case. And they still have to pay at a higher rate. In reference to my other ones, I am also quite concerned. We have people who are financially in situations where they can't afford it, especially our elderly, and here we are, we're increasing our rates. We need to try and help those people who are falling between the gaps. In reference to D, the special rate charges, well, those special rate charges, Council is the people who actually charge those special rates. Yes, it's Council's obligation that we actually have to have an obligation that we have to apply those special rates and we have to get money for them, but we also can do a dollar for dollar where we actually can match those rates. So I know that we can't scrap them completely, but we can match them with the special rates. We are the ones charging them. We should be the ones to be actually honouring it. I do not know what other offers are in place in reference to special charges and whether they will be honoured by state or federal relief packages. I doubt that at all. So in Gaetano's amendment, I definitely I give the ticks towards his amendment tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. There's some further speakers. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie. There's so much I could say, and I'm very limited time. We have to deliver a budget with small amount of space where there's been much more flexibility with the federal and state. Under normal circumstances and under low unemployment and sound economic, an increase in rates can be discussed and tolerated. In this economic climate, I have to support Councillor Gaetano Greco's motion and say that we should not be passing on the 2% interest increase on our rates for our rate residents. This is not a normal time. Therefore, we should not be delivering a normal budget. That's all I have to say on the matter.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to speak against this amendment. So it's often the case that there's a lot in here that would be lovely to do, but what we've got is we've got a situation where we have to really carefully balance this budget to make sure that we can continue to provide all the services that we need to, as well as provide a generous COVID recovery package that looks after our most vulnerable. I really commend the work that the officers have done to get there. This has been an incredibly difficult couple of months for the organisation and the community as a whole. And what we have in this amendment is we have a pretty regular rate rise of 2%. This is CPI, it's mandated by the state government. We can't go any further than that. I do think it's reasonable. And I just want to make it really clear that if we're talking about something like not increasing rates, then we're talking about cutting services. And I can't fathom that. I'd also like to foreshadow that I have an alternative motion or an amendment that's been circulated.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I've been listening to the debate with interest and I'd probably echo Councillor Newton's sentiments. What concerns me with the proposed amendment here is that it leads to the very likely situation of council staff having to be stood down because there are unfunded cuts and unfunded income components. So council staff having to be stood down, which has not been the case or the pattern, in fact, in Darebin. We have gone through the deployment model or the redeployment model. But the other thing, which is probably more concerning than just the obvious losing staff, would in fact be the removal of council services without identification of what those would be. So I'm not sure whether Councillor Greco in his amendment is proposing that we reduce expenditure on what I consider are essential services, things like maternal child health, or critical services to our local amenities, such as our tree planting program of 6,000 trees. It's not clear at all where those cuts would come from. And I'm really concerned when we have proposed either reductions in income or proposed additional expenditure that has no component attached to it as to what would be cut. Because you cannot simply reduce council's income lines. And in this case, as Councillor Newton has rightly pointed out, this is not an increase above CPI. This is an increase in line with what we would expect in order to maintain service levels as best as possible. So it concerns me greatly that we have an amendment here that has nothing on the other side of the ledger to explain what would be cut. And I don't believe that we should be engaging in secret cuts. That is not the tone of good governance, and certainly something I can't support. I'd encourage Councillor Greco to think about these proposals in a bit more detail and propose what would actually be cut in response.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? I'll therefore put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour and against? That amendment is lost. We'll note that in favour we had Councillor Greco, Councillor Williams and Councillor Messina, and opposed we had Councillor Newton, Councillor Amir, Councillor Lassurf, Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Rennie.
I have a second amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Newton had foreshadowed. I don't actually think it matters which order we do these in, but Councillor Newton had foreshadowed Councillor Greco on the basis that Councillor Newton foreshadowed that he...
I put forward a second. I had two motions. I put forward my first, and now I'm putting...
The order is unimportant. By all means, Councillor Newton's indicating she doesn't mind which order, so please move to your second one. So, Councillor Greco.
Shall I read it out again?
Yes, please.
Again, at the end of point 1, add the following, that subject to the following changes. That council set aside from the proposed surplus $100,000 to establish a subsidised council-run home gardening and maintenance program for low-income concession card holders who cannot look after their homes due to ill health or incapacity. B, the council set aside from the proposed surplus $200,000 to fund a specialist feasibility analysis and options assessment to start to address the toxic water quality of Edwards Lake. C, the council set aside from the proposed surplus $300,000 to develop concept design plans to completely rebuild the Reservoir Leisure Centre with a new 50-metre pool. And D, the council uses the balance of the proposed surplus to fund further capital works projects from the council's 10-year capital works program that are shovel-ready and will improve the infrastructure across the city.
Thank you for that amendment, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams has indicated that she would second that. We will now open to questions from the officers before entering debate. Councillor Lasserf.
I just wanted to ask a question. Given the officers said that the operating surplus is already allocated to the $3.7 million in operating surplus is already allocated to capital works projects, I just want to get a comment on allocating this. Would this mean that they would decrease the allocation to the capital works?
Thank you, Mr Hogan.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Yes, any decrease to the operating surplus would impact the $3.7 million that's been allocated towards the capital works program.
Thank you.
I seek a clarification. Just when we say that it impacts on the capital works program, does it impact on the capital works program of the following financial year or the other years?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, its impacts on 2021 budget.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure who can answer this question, but I'm going to put it in the hope that someone can. In relation to point B of this proposed amendment, there's reference to toxic water quality. I just would ask, in relation to Council's most recent report in relation to Edwards Lake, could we have some information about where the predominant sources of toxicity in Edwards Lake actually emanate from?
Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So there's been a recent report to Council early April, I think, that goes into detail. Certainly that's found that the water quality is not at a level that you could swim or boat in it. And also it's a lake inside a park that creates benefit for community who use the park. The water quality in that area comes from essentially the wider urban catchment. There's quite a lot of industrial land, and so that the water comes into a stormwater treatment wetland before it then enters the lake.
Thank you. Councillor Lasserf.
Sorry, could I just ask a follow-up question? My memory of that council report was that the feasibility analysis was much more than $200,000. So would we be able to complete this analysis with what's been proposed in the amendment?
Thank you, Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, our estimate for that work at the time was $280,000.
Thank you. Councillors, are there further questions in relation to the amendment? There are several. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie, could I please ask the officers to advise what other council-run home gardening and maintenance program has been in the budget prior, and what model were we looking at that has been withdrawn or perhaps has not been reconsidered in this particular budget?
Thank you. Kerry.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So we're about to start the gardening trial, which was funded in this current year's budget and is part of the Age Friendly Darebin project. We reported on it a few months ago. We're pretty excited about it because the group that will be supporting us will be employing young job seekers from Darebin. We were due to come back, and we are due to come back to Council in November with the outcome of the trial and the evaluation. The other thing to say in the Working for Victoria submission that we briefed councillors about earlier, There may be some opportunities in there, but that may or may not eventuate. But certainly on the books right now, we're about to start this trial.
Okay, so my question, I have a supplementary question, if I may, to you, Mayor. Is that an additional, so is Councillor Greco asking for an additional $100,000 to supplement that particular program, or is it in addition to that particular program? I'm a little confused.
My understanding is that it would be an additional and separate program. Ms McGrath, is that how you've read that?
That's how I've interpreted that, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Amir?
Thank you. In the budget that was put before us tonight, one of the key points was around maintaining a viable and sustainable cash position. So I was wondering, with this financial impact of $3 million, therefore committed in this way, whether that would impact on, I suppose, financial viability.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Amir. Mr Hogan?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Yes, if there's any change to the way that the budget has been presented this evening, it would have a financial cash impact on the council, on the financial sustainability in the short term and medium term. As I mentioned earlier, due to the changes due to COVID-19, the budget that's presented at the moment has changed significantly from what it was. But in the environment that we're in, it is fiscally responsible with what we're presenting this evening. So any changes that we do make would reduce our cash flow. And we know with the projections over the next 12 months, because of the financial hardship policy with regards to allowing the ratepayers to defer their rates, there could potentially be a significant impact to our cash, which at the moment is unknown. So any further changes to what we're presenting this evening will have an impact on that cash position. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Bishop?
May I also add to that is that if councillors could factor into their thinking that through the hardship policy and the fact that we are only one of 3 councils in metropolitan Melbourne that have applied the deferral of rates to the 30th of June next year, that is now causing significant pressure on our cash receipts. So that's cash in to the tune of $94 million. So what we're trying to do is ensure that we manage, when we don't have a crystal ball, we've done modelling to try to ascertain what does the cash flow look like from now until the end of June next year, bearing in mind that we don't know how the cash is going to come into the organisation. We still have outgoings that we need to, and other obligations such as salaries and wages. We also have construction contracts and obligations there that we need to be able to meet our financial obligations too. So we've been extremely diligent. We have taken this extremely seriously. There are a lot of responsibilities upon council. We have demonstrated the utmost of agility in responding to community and business needs to satisfy where we possibly can the demands and expectations of our ratepayers and our community at large. It has been a significant challenge. Thank you for the ongoing briefings that we've been having around this issue of COVID-19. We do not know, we can see the restrictions are starting to lift very, very
just
slowly.
a point of order. So I think our officer is more than giving us information, he's actually advocating a particular position. So can I ask that you address that, please?
Councillor Greco, thank you. Councillor Greco has raised that he thinks you've gone beyond answering the question. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Greco, so Ms Bishop, I'll ask that you stop there.
Thank you.
Are there further questions? Councillor Lasserf.
I just wanted to ask about point D. Again, it goes to the proposed surplus, and I'm assuming Councillor Greco assumes it hasn't been allocated to anything. In effect, hasn't the proposed surplus already been allocated according to the 10-year capital works program?
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Mr Hogan.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Yes, the $3.7 million has been allocated towards the 2021 capital budget.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Can I just ask a question? Given these items are not substantial items, and given that we have no borrowings, and I understand I don't even think we have even an overdraft, and I stand to be corrected on that. Could these expenditures be accommodated? How could these expenses be accommodated in any other way? These additional.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Greco. Mr. Hogan.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Some of the options would be, and I've mentioned it previously, is that you would need to reduce the capital works by 600,000 as proposed in the motion. That's the first lever that I would suggest, that you would be able to fund this. Again, we are only forecasting a small surplus of $3.7 million, so, which is already committed. So other than reducing the capital works, that's where I would suggest that you could move to fund these costs.
Thank you. Councillor Messina.
Given what the officer has just indicated, and we're still waiting whether that we are aware if the council elections were to proceed this October, are we able to make an amendment on the particular item number 2 in relation to council election and the council plan with a budget allocation of 980,000? Are we able to move an amendment where if the council elections do not go ahead, then perhaps we consider these items?
Thank you, Councillor Messina. I think I understand that you're trying to see if we could find money if that was to happen. I might ask Mr. Hogan to respond to that.
Sorry, can I just raise a procedural matter? I think that Councillor Messina wants to amend an amendment, which is not possible, and she wants to put forward an amendment herself, and we need to deal with this amendment first.
Mine was the question first of all, then I would raise an amendment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hogan, I don't know if you're able to comment on that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, just a general question. So the purpose of tonight is to adopt the draft budget. We would then go out for exhibition. So between endorsing the draft budget this evening and the proposal is to adopt the draft budget on the 15th of July. So between now and then, for example, if we do hear that the election have been postponed, then the option is there that that would allow some additional funds.
I'm satisfied with that answer.
So, yeah. So we do have a 6-week, 7-week period between this evening and adopting the draft budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan.
Adopting the budget.
Thank you. Are there further questions? No, we'll now move into the debate on that motion. Councillor Greco, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. Look, councillors, I'm putting forward these suggestions because I want to remind councillors that we do have a budget surplus. And every time I come to a budget meeting of council, I'm always told that that's the surplus, that's all we can do, we can't make any more alterations. It's like as if we've been locked into a straitjacket. I don't think that that's the case. I think that there is room in the budget to accommodate some of these items, and I think that given that this council has no borrowings whatsoever in terms of overdraft, I think it's very low, or whether we even have an overdraft, and I think that these additional items could easily be accommodated within our existing budget. And I'm sure that our officers will be able to accommodate these figures and apply them to our budget. So I'm not convinced, councillors, that our budget cannot accommodate these items. These items are important because these items talk about the long-awaited home gardening program. Yes, we have one we're going to go receive a report in November, and we don't even know how that's actually going to eventuate. Ever since I've been on council, 11 years, we've been asking for this, and it always gets knocked back, and it always gets referred to a report or a feasibility study, etc., etc. In relation to Edwards Park Lake, I think it's a disgrace, councillors, that we have the second biggest lake here in our city, and we're not prepared to lift a finger in order to try and improve the toxic water quality of that lake. And it actually disgusts me, councillors, that we're not prepared to do anything and just sit on our hands in relation to that, in relation to the Edwards Park Lake. And then in relation to the Reservoir Leisure Centre, the community is asking and screaming out for a 50-metre pool at the Reservoir Leisure Centre. And I'm just baffled, councillors, that the northern part of our city, which is the more socio-economically disadvantaged part of our city, cannot get from this council a commitment to actually rebuild that Reservoir Leisure Centre, which is falling apart. Everybody that you talk to can tell you that. And all the emails that we received about broken tiles and this and that, it's time that we rebuild that Reservoir Leisure Centre and that we build a 50-metre pool in an area of our city which much needs it. So, councillors, let's show some courage.
10 seconds.
Also, I ask our officers to show some creativity in relation to how we put together our budget so that we can accommodate these extra fees, extra expenses.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
Can I leave it to the end, please?
Reserving your right. Yes, further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'm speaking in opposition to this amendment. So just before this one, we had an amendment about not having a standard rate increase, and now we have an amendment about spending money that's already been allocated. So we've heard quite clearly from the officers that if we were to do this, it would affect our cash position. This money has already been allocated to capital works over next year. I just don't think that we can consider this. We've spoken about, as our GM said, we do have a gardening program that's being piloted this year already. So to put forward an extra one, I don't understand why you would do that. Edwards Lake, we talked about very recently, $280,000 for a study, as was talked about with the officers, is huge. When we're under a pandemic, we've got a very, very tight budget. For the Reservoir Leisure Centre, we've got $800,000 allocated in the current budget, as well as $50,000 too. And I don't think D makes sense when this has been allocated to future capital works.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Messina.
I have to vote not in favour of this amendment. First of all, we've already allocated funds for item number A, which is a home gardening council maintenance program. Number B, we've already talked about Edwards Lake, just like Councillor Newton says, and the Edwards Lake is really a complex area where you've got some water flows from other municipalities that also impact on the Edward Park Lake itself, so it needs to be in collaboration with the other municipalities. The $300,000 is to develop concept design plans. It is not for the new pool, it is for design plans. Developing more plans for future projects is not where this money should be going allocated toward this particular budget. We've got COVID-19 crisis situation. And we've already got $800,000 in the budget for Reservoir Leisure Centre. And item number D, I don't understand. I think the officer spoke in opposition to that and explained that in further detail, so I'm opposing.
So I'll just clarify that officers don't speak in opposition or favour of anything that provides some information.
Yep.
Thank you. Further speakers. Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm really struck by the fact that councillors have been through a process to get to this point. For any councillor to put forward a set of amendments that effectively strips the proposed surplus to nothing, which is what this amendment would do, without recognising not only the impact immediately on future budgets, but in fact the very real risk that this would place were any of our projections to be incorrect. And I say risk because it puts at risk those very same services and those very same jobs that we are so proud of in this city, over 100 services that we offer in the city of Darebin, critical services like maternal child health, critical services such as immunisation. These sorts of services and these council workers' jobs, frontline jobs supporting our community, are put at risk when we make what are considered unstrategic or non-strategic financial decisions, like what would happen as is listed up on screen. Councillors have been through a process. They should understand the fundamentals of the budget. They should understand the importance of having a modest surplus to in fact protect the integrity of the service offering that is there. So I'm quite surprised that we are looking at these amendments right now that would strip the surplus to zero. What I'm also surprised by, though, is in particular point B, which seems to completely ignore the findings of the report that Council just received at a recent Council meeting, and in fact ignores the work that has been done by people in our own community going back decades. I just found a 2017 report about Edwards Lake and Edgars Creek that talks about the high levels of industrial pollution and the fact that any work that we do actually has to start at water source, not locally, because that is where the toxic stuff predominantly comes from. So why would you spend $200,000 if you're not getting the action from the state government?
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams.
The gardening trial. Well, it is just a gardening trial. The whole point of Gaetano putting this forward is actually to ensure that we continue with the gardening. We've had a huge feedback from the community saying how desperately of need of these services, especially for those who are unwell, those who are elderly. Gardening and cooking are probably one of the two biggest strains regarding physically and emotionally in trying to get a job done. So we do know that it is in desperate need of what our community is actually screaming out for, especially if you have a loved one that's going through cancer and you don't have time to be doing the gardening. You don't have time, all you want to do is spend time with your partner, take him to hospitals and appointments and things like that. It's important that they know that people like Council are here to support those in need. In reference to Edwards Lake, yes, we got a wonderful report that did come back, and I don't disagree with that. However, it did not go that step forward. It could have gone that extra bit more, which it did imply and tell us in that report that there were huge outlets that came from properties and businesses to say that it was poisoning and polluting our Edwards Lake. With the feasible analyst, it can actually give a future guideline on where and what the future options are for this site. The report did not go that extra step of where we can go from there. It just gave us of what the impact of Edwards Lake is at this point in time. I won't go on about the Reservoir Leisure Centre because I've also have an amendment regarding that will be coming up. And due to the cutback of capital works, yes, we're having over, $10 million worth of capital works. It's huge. And it's a real shame because capital works is a big one here in Darebin, where we have numerous complaints from our residents the community regarding overgrown roundabouts and shrubs that are coming off our trees, out of our roads.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. That brings the debate to the end. I'll now put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour and against? That amendment is lost. We'll note that in favour were Councillor Greco and Councillor Williams, and voting against Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Messina, Councillor Lasserve, Councillor Newton, Councillor Amir and Councillor Rennie. Councillor Newton.
I'd like to propose an amendment, and it's been a couple of amendments and they've been circulated to our officers.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. I'll get you to read that amendment out.
All of it?
Yes, please.
Number 6 notes that the proposed revenue raised from the 2% rate increase as set by the Victorian Government's Fair Go rate system in 2020 to 21 is forecast to be $3.62 million and resolves to hypothecate this revenue in full for use as part of the $11.3 million COVID-19 Community and Business Resilience Recovery Package. Point 7 notes that in addition to the $11.3 million COVID-19 Community and Business Resilience Recovery Package, should Council's current Working for Victoria submission be successful, this will result in approximately 240 additional staff employed to respond to the impact of COVID-19, in addition to supporting the delivery of Council's recovery package. Point 8 notes that the estimated in-kind contribution for the Working for Victoria program is $50,000. This will include management and coordination of staff, occupational health and safety, quality assurance, communication and reporting requirements associated with this program. Point 9 notes the 2021 annual budget report to be tabled at the special council meeting on 15th of July 2020. Will include an update on the adjusted total financial commitment of the COVID-19 Community and Business Resilience Recovery Package. This will also include council's in-kind contribution.
Okay, it's been pointed out to me that we may need to do some renumbering and that point 6 might be 7.
That's fine with me.
Yep. So we'll just make sure, and then they go through from there. So that would be in addition to the 6 points listed in the motion in the council agenda, 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you for that. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McCarthy. Are there any questions?
If I've just would foreshadow I've got an additional amendment. So by seconding Councillor Newton's amendment, that does not prejudice my ability to put forward a separate amendment?
No, it doesn't. Thank you. Are there any questions in relation to this amendment? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I just wanted to understand from...
Councillor Greco, can I just get you to speak into your microphone? I'm not sure people in the audience would be able to hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Last one too.
That's good.
I just want to understand from this amendment a couple of things. I have a couple of questions, and I'll go through them one by one. Is that point number 7 talks about the revenue raised, the 2% rate increase. If that was to be used for the recovery package, what will be the consequence of that on our capital works budget, following the logic of what we heard before?
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Mr Hogan.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The proposal is that we would quarantine that $3.62 million from that 2% revenue, and it would be used if the $11.3 million that we've allocated towards the recovery package, if we are spending more than that, and the indications are that we are going to spend more than that. So, as I said, what we're proposing is that we would quarantine that money and use it if needed.
Ms Wilkinson had
My
something to
question was
add.
actually quite different to that, and I hope to get a specific answer this time, is that if the money was to be used as part of the package, what is the consequence of that in relation to other expenditure in regards to the budget?
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I think Ms Wilkinson may understand what you're looking for.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, thank you for the question, Councillor Greco. So, my reading of that motion would be that the impact of it is to note the source of funds for the package. So, previously, councillors resolved to create a recovery package that has a value of 11.3. This is about being transparent to say that part of the funding of that has a source of revenue that comes from the rate increase. So it doesn't directly impact the budget as proposed. It's more an indication of how money would be allocated specifically in this special instance.
Just a supplementary question, because it's absolutely still not clear to me. So what I want to understand is that will that money therefore be used as part of the relief package or not?
Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor Rennie. It will, but in a sense, the budget has already allocated that money to the recovery fund. So it's not in addition to, so it doesn't increase the value of the recovery fund as budgeted in the draft budget tonight. It simply reflects where part of the money, part of the $11.3 million would come from.
So if it doesn't increase the recovery fund, and we've already allocated 11.3 to the recovery fund, so it's not new money. It's not money. It's not extra money that has actually been put into the recovery fund. We're not actually putting in the 2% rate rise into the recovery fund. Could I just get some clarity on that?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, thank you for the question. As councillors know, there was a special council meeting in March where council resolved to adopt the recovery plan. and the funding source for that. That was based on a half a dozen, 10 principles, including so the budget assumptions, which allowed council to form a view that they were going to allocate the $11.3 million towards the recovery, were based on some financial assumptions. They included an increase to rates by the rate set by the Fair Go for Rates system and the state government. So all this does is reaffirm, so the budget has been built, the draft budget presented tonight for council's consideration has been built based on a number of factors, including based on a 2% rate rise. So, and that simply reflects that I suspect the intent, and you'd have to check with the councillor who proposed it. I've lost track who that was, thank you. But I suspect the intent of that is to let the community know that there's a direct relationship between the increase in the rates and the COVID-19 package. So it could have been, for example, that council funded, and it's been, as you know, the package has been funded through multiple sources, through cuts in the capital program, through increased in income as a result of the rates as proposed. It could have been funded, for example, through cuts to salaries or cuts or increases in other fees and charges. What this does is just, I think it is intended just to make it transparent to the community how that would be used.
Thank you. Councillor Messina.
I'm happy to second I acknowledge that there is no money that actually is affected.
Sorry, we're getting into the debate.
Budget.
I think I did have a seconder, which was, yeah, Councillor McCarthy. So thank you, Councillor Messina. We had a seconder. Are there any further questions in relation to the amendment? Councillor Messina.
Now I can ask my question. Basically, what this is commentary. There's actually no financial implication on this particular budget. It is basically an allocation of funds and where we are wanting the funds.
You're debating. Are you asking a question?
No, I'm asking the question. Yes, it's commentary.
Okay. Mr Hogan.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, that is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions?
I just had a question, and I know that this is, I'm going to ask it anyway. In point 8, it refers to the Working for Victoria submission resulting in 240 additional staff employed. I guess I just have a question about whether we can make any assurances or try as hard as we can that those people employed are living in Darebin.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Ms Bishop or Ms Wilkinson?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, thank you for the question. Very early last week, Council lodged its application for the Working for Victoria Fund, and we very explicitly made it clear that our strong preference is for the pool of workers to come from Darebin. That isn't guaranteed, but most councils that I'm aware of have made similar requests and have had some success. It will depend on the pool of candidates for the roles, though. We've gone further than that. We've also asked that preference be given to community members from Darebin that come from disadvantaged and diverse backgrounds, women and people with disabilities, cold backgrounds, for example.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Lassurf, and the answer, Ms Wilkinson. Are there further questions in relation to the amendment? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I just want to refer back to point number 7. So the budget surplus of 3.62 actually takes into account the $11.3 million resilience recovery package. My understanding that the 3.62 surplus incorporates within that the $11.3 million thing. If that is the case, isn't this just a clever accounting mechanism?
Sorry, I think you're coming quite close to entering debate. Mr Hogan?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Yes, that is correct. The $3.6 million is included in the $11.3 recovery package.
Thank you. Councillors, are there further questions? Councillor Greco.
Well, another further question is that in relation to point number 10, where it will come back to a special council meeting on the 15th of July, again, will that mean that residents will not be able to make submissions or ask questions at the final meeting when the budget is actually considered for endorsement.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Greco. Mr Mann, I'll refer that to you.
Through you, Mayor, that special council meeting, the summons for that meeting hasn't been produced, but it's certainly conceivable that, well, I'll say two things. This process of advertising the budget, in fact, invites submissions. So we're going to have a hearing of submissions committee. Damien will know the exact date, but that's going to occur at the end of the 28-day period. So there'll be an opportunity for the community to come along to that meeting, ask questions, and we will actually hear submissions from those people. That's the process. We will then move to a special council meeting to adopt the budget. That's point one. In terms of the summons for that special council meeting, the items to be listed on that agenda, it's certainly conceivable that we could list on we certainly could list on that agenda a provision, but it's contrary to the process we're following. We're following a process where we're under Section 223 of the Act, we're calling for submissions, we're giving people an opportunity to come along and talk in support of their submissions. We're going to hear them, we're going to consider those submissions, and we're going to make a decision. So that's the process. I think that's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you. Further to that, I can note that in the actual recommendation and the motion before us, the date for the hearing of submissions committee is 6 p.m. on Thursday the 25th of June. So we actually already have that date where we would invite submissions from the community. Councillor Surf.
Sorry, and I just wanted to clarify that the motion actually indicates that the special committee will be on the 15th of July, and this isn't a new piece of information but was already in the report. Is that? Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Greco.
Just some more clarity in relation to the submission process is that I understand that the submission process, and I've been involved in quite a few of them, is that where residents make submissions, it's not an opportunity for them to actually ask questions and engage with council. They just purely make submissions. So how would that work when...
So, Councillor Greco, I'm going to stop you because we're in a process of questions on the amendment.
It's related to that point, to point number 10.
Well, point number 10 doesn't refer to the special, the hearing of submissions.
Yeah, but the answer that I got back was in relation to hearing of submissions, and I'm just trying to clarify that because that was introduced as part of the answer to my question, and now I'm trying to seek some clarification of what hearing of submissions actually...
on that basis, I'll...
I mean, I want to raise a point of order. This is tiresome, and I feel like we're going over old ground, which is a point in the local law that I can find if you want me to. I feel like we've kind of explored this whole hearing, allowing people to make submissions. And there's a process that we've followed every year, and Councillor Greco has been here for 12 years.
Councillor Surf, you're debating, you've made a point of order. I think your point of order is that the question is repetitive. I think Councillor Greco felt that he had a follow-up question in relation to something he'd heard. On that basis, I will allow it, but then ask that we cease this type of questioning because I think it is tending in that direction. So, Councillor Greco, I'll just allow Mr Mann to try and answer the final question that you had.
Yes, through you, Mayor Rennie, and I will ask, I'll need clarification from Mr Hogan, but in the submissions that we receive on the budget, if people ask specific questions, we will respond to those. We will respond to those both in the report that goes to Council and when people come along at the hearing of submissions committee and ask those questions, we will listen to those and they'll be able to ask those questions. But I'll just clarify with Mr Hogan and Ms Bishop.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Yes, basically I agree with what you're saying, that at the hearing of the submissions, the submitters have the opportunity to speak on their submission and the councillors can hear those submissions. But my understanding is they can't ask questions, they hear them, and then the councillors will have a meeting after the submissions to assess those submissions.
Okay, Ms Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, if I could just add, it's my experience at this council that at the hearing of submissions meeting, the councillors do, with the permission of the chair, and have at times, there have been opportunities for councillors to ask submitters for further information to elaborate on their submissions for points of clarity. But it's important to note that the hearing of submissions is not to form, councillors can't form a view, as you know. It's simply to seek to understand. So it has tended to be a relatively open forum, but the intent is to make submissions and then very simply seek points of clarification.
Thank you. We'll move on. Are there any questions on other matters relating to this amendment? Okay, we'll move into debate on the amendment. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I think, as we've been talking about tonight, this is a really difficult time for our community, and we know that not everyone will be able to pay rates at this time and will need them deferred, which is why I've got a really strong hardship policy that we've put forward. But not everyone is in that position. So for myself, for example, I work at La Trobe University. We're going through a pretty tough time financially, and we're doing everything we can to get through it, but there's probably likely to be job losses. But I'm personally okay for now and for this year. So for me, I am in a position to pay my rates, and I will be doing so, and there are other people in that position. We don't know exactly how many people won't be able to yet, but for the people that can contribute, I think the fact that the 2% rate increase, people will know that that's been allocated to the $11.3 million COVID-19 Community and Business Resilience Recovery Package, I think is going to mean a great deal to people like myself who are in a position to pay at the moment. So I think that this is really, really good for the whole community, the people who are in the position to pay. And I also note with number 8, which is about working for Victoria, I had a look at what Moreland's doing. They've already had theirs successfully applied for, and they're certainly calling for local staff. So I really hope that we can do that too if we're successful. And yeah, this is basically about just making sure that the rate increase goes directly to the COVID Resilience and Recovery Package, and that we have put in a Working Victoria submission, which I'm really hoping that we get. I think the deployment of staff so far to do planting has been fantastic, and I'm sure that we have room for these 240 additional staff.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Newton for taking the initiative with these additional points, because what they do is they do shed light. They do not increase expenditure in relation to the exhibited budget. They do not reduce services. What they shed a light on is, in fact, the what I believe is the untold story of this budget, and why it is probably the hardest budget that this council has had to frame, certainly in my time on council, but I think also the most critical budget. What we have here, and Councillor Newton has pointed that out, and I think it's critical that we're transparent about this, is that this budget is defiantly pro-community, it's pro-local business, it's pro-local worker, and it's pro-grassroots action, because what it is, it's about delivering on the promise that this council made in its council plan, and it made to its community after consultation, which was to say that we will do those things that are important, that are significant, that are focused on local action, that are bold. And the strength and size of the recovery package is bold. It's the largest of any kind of any council, as far as I know. But alongside that, and this is where the regional point that Councillor Newton has referred to in relation to the Working for Victoria scheme is absolutely critical, is that the last figure I've heard is something like 1,000 people who've become unemployed is the sort of impact that councils in the north are trying to solve. And Darebin is critical to that, with the figure there of 240 people, hopefully predominantly Darebin residents, people that have been, through no fault of their own, lost work, lost income. I know people in my own school who have literally lost both incomes in a household, and going through a terrible time. So we have a huge challenge. We have a budget that responds to that, and I think this is worth saying.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Mayor, I'll be speaking against this amendment. Look, I'll just say from the outset, and I'll be quite frank about this, I think it's a Clayton's amendment. And why I say I think it's a Clayton's amendment, because let's think about what is being said here. We're saying that we're going to help residents that have been affected by the coronavirus. Some people have been heavily affected. Some traders have been heavily affected. We're saying we're going to increase your rates, and then we're going to help you at the same time. So that's what I mean, that it's a Clayton's amendment, because it's not actually providing any real rate relief to shopkeepers, traders, and people who, as a result of the coronavirus, have actually been affected in terms of losing their jobs, etc. Instead, what we'll be doing is imposing on them a rate increase. Whilst a lot of people's and shopkeepers and businesses' revenue has gone down, council's revenue is going up. I don't fathom that. I don't know how we can further unpack that. Here we have businesses going down as a result of the shutdown and the restrictions, whilst council's revenue is going up. It's an incredible situation, councillors. And what this amendment does, in a Clayton sort of way, saying, oh, well, we're going to help you, but first you've got to pay more rates and then we'll sort of help you in turn. Councillors, I just find this completely irresponsible on the part of council.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams.
I'd have to agree with my fellow councillor, Councillor Greco, where I usually go by reports, and I like reports because it actually shows guidelines and guidance of where this council's going, and particularly in this case, we're looking at a whole heap of words, but yet it doesn't actually describe exactly where the money will be going, exactly who will be helping, and what is the actual process. And there's no program here. It just says that we're just going to help the people of our community and businesses. Exactly what are we going to be doing there? Are we going to be giving more money to one lot of people and not another person? I can't, I just don't see it. It's not clear to me. And yes, I like its theory. However, I like to see the breakdown of where and what we propose to do with that money.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? No, I'll put that... Oh, Councillor Amir? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. We'll note that Councillors McCarthy, Messina, Lesurf, Newton, Amir and Rennie voted in favour, and that Councillors Williams and Greco voted against. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, I would like to take the opportunity to just correct something that was a point that was made. It is actually not correct to say that council's income is increasing next year. Council's projected income is actually projected to decrease on this financial year overall. It is true, however, to say that that one line item is increasing, but overall council's income is projected to be less next year than it is this year, even taking into account the forecast amendments with COVID. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms Wilkinson. I think it is an important one. Okay. Councillor Williams?
I also have an amendment.
That's great. We'll get that up on the screen and then I'll ask that you read it. Okay, Councillor Williams, could you read your proposed amendment?
Yes, that, thank you. that I move tonight for the draft budget to add the point number read as follow: the subject to council to put $150,000 towards a report for Reservoir Leisure Centre upgrades of a 50-metre pool and facilities.
Thank you for that. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Greco, thank you. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to that? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just seen this for the first time, so I'm just trying to understand what the amendment suggests, $150,000 to fund a report. I'm just wanting to understand a report on the feasibility or is it actually the design and development, just to understand what the report would actually deliver.
Thank you. I don't know if that's Mr Hogan or Mr Hewitt, perhaps.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I've interpreted that to mean some sort of feasibility. It could be design, but feasibility, bearing in mind that Council's already asked for some additional work on our Reservoir Leisure Centre, which will come back to the Council in the second half of 2020.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the response. I would just actually ask, just because I'm a bit confused by this, because it seems to either replicate or conflict with existing work that is either in the budget or has already been underway. So if we could just get a little bit more information, if that's available tonight, on what is actually proposed in relation to RLC, either in the current budget or in the proposed budget, just so we can all be clear on what we're talking about here.
Thank you. And I may need to call on Ms McGrath as well as Mr Hewitt for that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I can perhaps talk to the capital components of it, and then Ms McGrath will talk about some of the other additional work. The draft Capital Works program for next year proposes $800,000 to continue the work that's been underway to rectify minor renewals and upgrades that are required, including to the roof, the space frame, some mechanical systems and the bathrooms at RLC. So those are the capital works proposed for next year, in addition to works that are currently underway, including the creche roof is one thing that comes to mind at RLC.
Thank you. And Ms McGrath, in relation to studies underway?
Yeah, through Mayor Rennie. So in October 2019, Council approved 2 resolutions which are related, that we conduct further investigation to inform the future design of any works at Reservoir Leisure Centre. And it was based on really understanding the health, wellbeing and social economic impacts that we could leverage from any renewed centre. The second part was a comprehensive report with how the redevelopment of the Reservoir Leisure Centre could address the social disadvantage of the northern end of the city. And that's what we're actually progressing. We're due to come back to Council with the findings of that work in September.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A question, Councillor Greco?
Yeah, just seeking further clarification, just from the answer that I just heard, there's no reference in that response in regards to a 50-metre pool. So can I just get some understanding in regards to that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Greco. Ms McGrath or Mr Hewitt, I don't know if you're able to answer that in relation to the planning and reports that are underway.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Quite a lot of work has previously been done to present some options to the Council about some potentials for Reservoir Leisure Centre's development. They were paused in late 2019 after Council sought the additional work, which would then help inform perhaps a future proposal. So those things are all in the mix. Any number of different elements could be included in any future redevelopment of Reservoir Leisure Centre, but we're on pause as we seek to do the additional work that the Council asked for.
Thank you, Mr Hewitt. Councillor McCarthy and then Councillor Greco.
Sorry, Councillor Greco's question and Mr Hewitt's response just raised a question for me here, which is that is it possible that the piece of work that's being undertaken, which I do recall, I believe was Councillor Lawrence or Councillor Greco's, there were 2 resolutions at the time, proposals, could the work that's currently underway identify potential future needs such as a 50-metre pool or other facilities that would in fact respond to the social community and wellbeing outcomes that are now being aligned with RLC?
Yes, again through Mayor Rennie, I believe that it will give us a good read on what facilities are required as a result of that study, and really guide, what it could look like. And then we'd need to go through the next stage would be further consultation, detailed design, like we have with other major redevelopments.
And just to be clear, that report's coming to Council in September, is that?
That may depend on caretaker mode, Senator. Councillor Greco.
Again, Mayor Rennie, I just note that in the response that was given, there's no specific reference in regards to the feasibility study of a 50-metre pool. So can we get some clarity in relation to that? Does the study that's being conducted actually refer to a 50-metre pool?
Thank you, Councillor.
Again, my apologies for not being clear, Councillor. So through yourself, Mayor Rennie, I've got the resolution in front of me and I can read it again if you like. There is no reference to specifically a 50-metre pool in the two resolutions moved and seconded by Councillor Lawrence and seconded Councillor Greco in the first instance and then swapped for the second resolution. So that's what we're working off of now. We're actioning those two resolutions.
Thank you. Is there a further question? No, we'll move into debate on this amendment then.
Can I ask a question? I feel like we've had this debate in a previous amendment, and is this, I guess, contrary to the part of the local law, which I can find, in that this is a similar motion that we shouldn't be considering again?
Thank you for that point of order, I suppose, Councillor Lassurf. I believe that I'm actually going to say I think this is sufficiently different that we can debate it. So we will debate the amendment put forward by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
I'm happy to reserve my rights to speak.
As the mover, you can't.
Oh, I can't. Okay, cool. Sorry, thank you. Local schools in the area like Preston, Reservoir, Regent, even Thomastown and Kingsbury all need a 50-metre pool. The schools have swimming lessons, swimming carnivals, house carnivals and inter-school carnivals as well. There's schools that come out from Mernda that come into swimming places and pools, but yet they're restricted in the amount of pools and where they can go and the length of the pools that they have to swim in. The change areas and access to these pools, the saunas, are out of date. And on many occasions, these are not working. All the pools are overcrowded, and with some people wanting to use a hydro pool and internal pools are overcrowded. As opposed to the outside pool, there are only a couple of times only a couple of times a month during the year that those pools are actually available over the summer period. Making the Reservoir Leisure Centre is underutilised in so many areas and so many ways that in many times it's overcrowded in a lot of areas and other times there's no crowd at all. There is no balance and there is no harmony.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
I reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Williams for providing some background to this. I'm a little bit confused, however, as to how this proposed investment actually relates to the piece of work which, as I would draw back to Councillor's attention, it was only in November last year, in fact, that Council embarked on what I think is an incredibly exciting pathway for RLC, which was to actually look at what Reservoir Leisure Centre is and should and could be with the right type of investment, the right type of planning, the right type of engagement from our community to deliver on the social and wellbeing outcomes and the economic outcomes, in fact, of that targeted investment. What this does is really put the cart before the horse, so to speak, and to say, actually, we know better than the health experts that we in fact have said we're going to engage with. So I believe, in fact, that the resolutions of November were unanimous. At no point in time in either of those resolutions did Councillor Williams or any other councillor say, and part of this has to be a 50-metre pool. I'm really hoping that that's where we end up, that we see the sort of facilities that in fact our community wants and deserves. But we haven't actually got that answer yet because that piece of work is underway. There is a report forthcoming, as we've already heard, which is coming to Council potentially in September, which sets the scene for the sort of investment that is required at RLC to deliver on those outcomes. So this seems to send a very confused message to our community that on the one hand we want to invest. It may be in fact that we come back and the community says and the experts say, in fact we need a 100-metre pool and we need X, Y and Z. So I'm very concerned when we have what seem ad hoc proposals that actually completely contradict the very targeted work that was proposed and endorsed by all councillors as recently as November.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, may I ask a question?
No, you can no longer ask questions. Debate on the amendment has commenced. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco, you reserved your right. Would you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, I fully support the inclusion of this item in the budget, and the reason is that is when it's said that you know that we didn't consult health experts and that you know we still have to look at our socioeconomic analysis and things like that. Also, we're not also listening to the community. The community is saying to us as a ward member that a 50-metre pool at the Reservoir Leisure Centre is what is needed. Also, I'd point out, councillors, that in relation to the Northgate Aquatic Centre, from my knowledge, we didn't consult health experts. We didn't do a socioeconomic analysis. We just went ahead and we're going to spend $63 million on having an aquatic centre with a 50-metre pool. So here we have, when we talk about reservoir, and when we talk about the Reservoir Leisure Centre, we put all these obstacles in the way about why reservoir can and can't have this and could and not have this, and whether it just needs a paint job or whether it should be completely redeveloped. I find that there's a bit of discrimination here in terms of properly giving account to the needs of the northern end of our city. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or a sociologist to understand where the socioeconomic need is in our city and why we need to completely redevelop with a 50-metre pool in Reservoir.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there I think that brings the debate to the end. We'll now vote on that amendment. All those in favour and against? That amendment is lost. We'll note that Councillors Williams and Greco voted in favour and Councillors Newton, Lesurf, Messina, McCarthy and Rennie voted against. Councillor McCarthy.
Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion that's been provided to councillors and to officers and should hopefully appear on screen.
So, Councillor McCarthy.
It's point 2.
So, if you could read out point 2, which would be an addition.
Thank you, Mayor. So, point 2.
Sorry, I'll just clarify. We've got 6. There's something wrong because the addition should result in 7 points. So, I just want to find out which one's disappeared. It may be that it is over the page and it's the one that authorises the Chief Executive Officer. We'll just clarify. I think what we're clear on is that we're talking about the addition of a point.
That's correct.
So it's only one extra point?
So the only, can I be clear? I'll ask Councillor McCarthy to read out
Sure.
the point that he is wishing to have included as an additional point, noting that it, in what's in front of people has been added to points existing. So Councillor McCarthy, if you could slowly read it out, and noting it's point 2.
Point 2, thank you, Mayor. Point 2 notes that the draft budget includes running the Solar Saver program, including the special charge stream focused on supporting low-income households to the value of $1 million ex-GST in brackets. The draft budget also includes the Solar Saver bulk buy stream, which will be offered to both the broader community and all households and businesses currently on the Solar Saver program waiting list to support them to install solar PV.
Thank you for that proposed amendment, Councillor McCarthy. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Amir.
Mayor, could I just appoint? Could we just have that amendment on the screen?
Just, okay, I might ask, just so
Because
that it's
I
larger,
think
if we
it's a
could
bit
delete
awkward just to
everything
go-
other than point 2. Thank you, Councillor Greco. That's actually what we've had for all the other amendments.
Could I, pardon me, through you, Mayor Rennie, if I could just clarify to councillors, the alternate motion up there doesn't reflect the amendments that have already been voted on and accepted, and so I agree with Councillor Greco that it would perhaps be clearer to just see the amendment as proposed. Otherwise, there's a risk that it implies that the other matters are up for debate. So we'll just, if you could just please just bear with us, councillors, we'll be there in a second.
Is it possible to go ahead with my amendment?
I think it's the
Hang on,
same
I think
issue,
we've got...
councillor.
Okay, so there is the additional point that Councillor McCarthy is proposing through this amendment to put in. Is there a seconder for that?
I have a question.
We'll seek a seconder to make sure it is actually accepted as an amendment and doesn't
I may
lapse.
second it.
Sorry, was that someone over there?
Councillor Amir had seconded it.
Councillor Amir indicated seconding, but
She can't.
Okay.
I have a question. I may second it, but I have a question before I second the motion.
Okay, on that basis, you move the initial. So on that basis, Councillor Messina, let's just have the question.
We're proposing the additional of $1 million. What will be actually coming out of the budget to balance the books?
I'll get clarification, but I think that's actually in the budget already. Mr Hogan.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, that's included in the budget at the moment.
Okay. So, Councillor Messina, would you care to second the amendment?
Yes, I will, because it's an explanation as to why.
Thank you. And apologies, Councillor Newton. I mistakenly thought you'd moved something. So, okay. So we now have an amendment in front of us. Councillor Greco, do you have a question?
If I may.
Yep.
Now that I could see the item talks about noting. Does this is this amendment superfluous in terms of actually making any changes to the budget?
Councillor Greco, thank you. I'll refer that to Mr Hogan.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, no, there's no change to the budget.
Thank you.
My follow-up question is that what is the value of having this amendment if it doesn't result in any changes?
I'm not going to actually refer that to the council officers because I think that it actually asks them to enter into a debate, and that question, Councillor Greco, which may be a very valid question, is one to actually explore through debate. Are there any questions in relation to the content of the amendment or the... Okay. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and hopefully I'll be able to answer Councillor Greco's question because it's a good question and it's an important question. What this note seeks to do is make very, very clear that Council's original commitment with Solar Savers has always been a program that supports those most vulnerable, the low-income households in our community who, for a whole range of regulatory reasons and individual reasons, are cut off from access to installing solar on their roofs and potentially are at risk of rising energy costs. As one of the co-architects, and I note Councillor Greco being part of that process of the original Solar Savers program some time ago, Our original intention was to make this a program that supported those low-income households. I've been a staunch advocate of the expansion of Solar Saver. We've in fact seen Solar Saver become the most successful rooftop installation program of any local government in the country, and in fact the largest such thing as well. What we've also experienced is the incredible demand for Solar Saver over the last few years in this term of council, as part of our commitment to double the amount of solar in the city, and of course to seek to facilitate the installation of solar on 4,000 buildings. What we've also seen is that we've had to make some very important decisions about the prioritisation of low-income households to actually put them at the front of the queue so that we make sure that the original intent of the program delivers on that promise. But what we've also sought to do at every stage is, where we can, is actually to incorporate other households and also in more recently businesses to be able to become part of the scheme. The reality of the Solar Saver scheme is that it requires a significant amount of cash flow in order for it to accommodate the significant numbers that we have reached in the past. And we've had installations in the order of 1,000 a year. The figure that's proposed here is in fact what has been identified as the likely low-income household component. And so what this does, this motion, is seeks to make very clear that for the remaining households, and there may be, and I don't have the number in front of me, but we may be in the hundreds at the moment of people on the waiting list for Solar Saver, that we actually want to have a mechanism, and in fact there is a mechanism in the budget papers that makes very clear that we will work with those people through a bulk buy model, a Solar Saver bulk buy model, where the installers and the equipment and the actual entire process is made simple, just as Solar Savers is, but supporting those people through a bulk buy model rather than the rates-based model. We're putting the rates-based model forward, prioritising low-income households, and we're allowing a bulk buy model to allow everyone else to get on board, to get through that waiting list, and to make sure that every household in Darebin, regardless of income, can have solar on their roof, can actually have a defence against the rising energy costs that have been imposed through regulatory regimes of both sides of politics. And so this is a really important response, and it's delivering on our promise that if you live in Darebin or you have a business in Darebin, you can get your solar on roof, and council is your partner in that process.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina.
What can I say further to that? I just want to note that this is additional comments. It is a guide and directions that also complements Councillor Newton's initial notice of motion to say this is what we are doing. It is the why, the how and the when that we are delivering, and our message to the community. So I think it's very cleverly done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers to this amendment? Councillor Greco.
Mayor, look, I will support the amendment because I've been a strong advocate of the Solar Savers program. I must say also in relation to the Solar Savers program is that I believe in recent years we have dropped the ball in relation to directing the Solar Savers program to those on lower incomes. And the last statistic that I've seen from reports that I think not more than 30% of the Solar Saver participants are our targeted low-income community, which therefore means that the ones that are actually making use of the Solar Saver program almost go contrary to the original intention, and that was to, one, is to reduce the amount of carbon that is in our community or in society, and secondly, to assist those lower income people to deal with their energy expenses. So I hope that, you know, I'm glad that we've got $1 million in the budget to continue the Solar Savers program, and I would hope that all that $1 million is all targeted to lower socioeconomic income, and also targeted to people who at the moment are affected by the coronavirus. That is the economic impacts of the coronavirus, particularly those ones on the job seeker and the JobKeeper program. They are ones that could actually make use of this because it would actually lower their energy costs in the forthcoming year. So just to conclude, I think we have to redirect the Solar Savers program to target it back to people who are on lower incomes, and not your barristers and lawyers that leave down the northcote end of town that take advantage of this interest-free.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Amir.
I'd say that we should not redirect to disadvantaged households because there's no need for a redirection. That's how the program has been for its entire duration, and I'm really proud that we've been able to open it up to other families, to all businesses across Darebin to not just meet but exceed our goal of doubling solar in Darebin during our council term. What Councillor McCarthy has clarified through his amendment here is the $1 million which will exclusively be for disadvantaged households. However, that doesn't mean that everyone else is excluded. We know that there are people who have been waiting quite a long time to get solar panels on their roofs, and they will continue to be supported through the bulk buy program for people who can afford it. It's also worth noting that this does not mean that people will be paying the full cost up front in most cases. When we first established the Solar Savers program, not only at the beginning under a previous council, but the expanded model under this council, it was prior to the state government initiative with the rebates available. So the families that fall within that category, it is quite broad. I believe it's up to around $180,000 a year, which would be the majority of households in Darebin would be eligible for a rebate that they can access by getting the bulk buy. I am someone who previously didn't have solar panels on their roofs because it's really can be quite a technical and difficult thing. And I know from talking to other, we do now, but talking to other families who are in a similar situation that really what they want is someone to do the hard technical work of knowing what do I need and what's good value. And that is a service that we can continue to provide to all families in Darebin so that we can continue to reduce their electricity bills by getting more solar panels up on those roofs.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That amendment is carried unanimously. Councillors, are there any further amendments? Councillor Williams.
I have a further amendment. My further amendment was in regards to also the Solar Savers.
So, not debating it, just read it out.
And it's to ask for council to put in the $3 million towards the Solar Savers program into the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Greco, thank you. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to that? Yes, Councillor McCarthy.
I would have thought the previous debate might have made that clear, but I'll ask the question anyway. Through you, Mayor, to our officers, in relation to the allocation that we currently have in the budget to meet the current identified need of low-income households through Solar Savers, do officers consider that the current amount would meet the need of low-income households as has been identified and forecast?
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for that question. Ms Olivier?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it's not something I've specifically looked at. We've certainly designed the program that's in the draft budget to focus on low-income households, and generally we prioritise those low-income households.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. At what point in time would Council have a sense once the next round of Solar Savers is advertised, recruited, at what point in time would Council expect to have a better idea if there was need for additional funds to ensure that our low-income households could jump on Solar Savers? When would that likely to be?
Look, we would expect in certainly the mid-year budget process to have identified any substantive feedback that might impact the program, a whole range of matters.
Thank you. Ms Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Having said that, though, I think it's we have to be. I would caution council on planning for an increase in this program. It has been a very difficult thing to recommend a reduction of this program to councillors. Like councillors, we feel very proud of the program, but the times that we are in has meant that many of council's long-standing programs have had to be reviewed. And that is why we're recommending it. If council was to increase the cost of this program as part of this budget, it would occur at the expense of something else. It may be that at mid-year we will have a sense of whether or not the position that we're recommending to council has been too conservative, but it would be that would not be known until probably February next year, in fact, when the mid-year process is completed. Sometimes that's March, actually, in which case it would practically be very difficult to reallocate money to capital.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Williams?
Just through you, Mayor Rennie, what was the Solar Savers program last year and what the amount we put in the budget and what are we looking at this year? So comparing the two and the difference.
Thank you. Ms Olivier?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, the current year budget, so for 2019-20, was just over $5 million.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? No, we'll therefore commence debate. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you. Council pays the upfront cost of the system, including the installation. The ratepayer pays the cost back over 10 years interest-free. It is an initiative and an award-winning program responding to the climate emergency, environmental and sustainability issues, particularly in Darebin. It is an excellent program, particularly now with so many people that are working from home, especially assisting low-income household residents. Businesses will also benefit long-term. This is a no-brainer. The Solar Savers has been a very successful program in Darebin and has been running here for more than 6 years. All the money comes back to council in this program. It is not of any financial loss to council in the long term. We need to continue the Solar Savers program as it keeps our contractual agreement that council has. It also keeps many employed and working during this pandemic crisis, while many have become unemployed. The Solar Savers program is a job keeper. Let's not make it a job killer.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
I reserve my right to speak, Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, it's nice to have the what Solar Savers is, and I recognise that text. I think I've actually read that text or similar text on our website and in other publications, so it's always nice to be reminded. Having been on the journey from the very beginning and having advocated for the massive expansion of Solar Saver, I actually think we've got the budget right in relation to this, which is to say that if we were to increase the allocation as we currently have, we potentially run the risk on two fronts. One of those fronts is that we have to cut something. And we have to cut something that in fact could impact on those exact households that we are seeking to benefit here. And I don't want us to do that. What we've also done though is we've done an incredible piece of work behind the scenes to understand and identify what the balance is between the low-income households that do not have any other option than Solar Saver. And that's the reason why we set that up. I just would draw that to Councillor Williams' attention, that the very purpose of this was to provide a financial mechanism for those who can't afford it. Councillor Greco made the point before, and I just would make this very clear. Throughout the last few years, with the massive expansion of Solar Saver, low-income households have always been put to the front. It is in fact at the very DNA of the program. So if you are able to pay and you are able to get on the waiting list, that's fine, but you need to wait until a low-income household has actually had their Solar Saver installation occur. What that means, and why we have proposed a bulk buy scheme to clear the list effectively, is to give those households and those businesses who can find that money at record low interest rates to actually join in that process. So I'm very concerned about Councillor Williams' proposal here, because it is not based on the good work of our officers, the evidence around the proportions, but in fact runs the risk of in fact cutting other elements of our service offering. It doesn't identify where the secret cuts are going to come from, and I'm very happy to support the proposal that we've got in the budget and the note that all councillors voted for only minutes ago.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
I understand the logic behind this particular notice of motion. I would like to support it, but I cannot, on the simple grounds that we're asking to not pass on rate increases, but we need to find a further $3 million. Where is that $3 million going to come from? So I find the reason behind the motion understandable, but I just can't find the $3 million in the particular budget at this particular time.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I'd like to support the amendment. And look, first of all, I think by increasing it by an extra $3 million, one, that it creates jobs and it actually helps to stimulate the local economy. And that's very important in this particular times that we're in. Also, it ensures that the broader community can also get access to the Solar Savers program, and also it ensures that the low-income households are not squeezed out as a result of not getting access to the Solar Savers program. And I point out, even though Councillor McCarthy made a point, that low-income householders are a small percentage of the participants in this scheme, when the whole aim of the scheme was to predominantly directed at them. In terms of how to pay for this, look, I would have expected to see that there are many ways that we could pay this. One is that council has reserves, and it can actually dip into its reserves, a bit like the rest of the community is dipping into their reserves in these particular times. And secondly, and most obviously, because the money is actually coming back to us, is that this sort of project easily lends itself to actually borrowing money to actually ensure that the program is continued. Interest rates at the moment are almost zero. Historically, they haven't been this low. So here's an opportunity for us to maintain the momentum, maintain capital expenditure, if you like, in our community, and also maintain our drive in relation to our environmental credentials, and maintain our drive in relation to ensuring that people can, in future, participate in having lower energy costs and at the same time doing the right thing by the environment.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll now put Councillor Lesurf.
Can I speak to the motion?
Sure.
Yep. I guess it breaks my heart that I have to vote against this, because I would like to maintain the spending in the Solar Savers program. But as other councillors have outlined, it can't be justified in the current environment. And particularly this motion hasn't identified how we will, I guess, find the additional $2 million that currently isn't in the budget. Councillor Greco's arguments said, there's only a small percentage of local low-income households that access the program, and yet he wants the program to focus on that. We don't need $3 million to make sure that we reach those low-income households, and we think that, as Councillor McCarthy said in the previous debate, $1 million will be sufficient to cover that. All of those other people on the waiting list can access the Solar Savers program through the bulk buy stream. They can be guided through the process, taking the technical difficulty of putting solar panels on their roofs through council's support, through the bulk buy scheme. And those types of people are usually the types of people that might have the capacity to pay upfront for the solar panels. So I think it's an important distinction that the Solar Saver program is pivoting this year given the decrease in funding that we're putting towards it. The other point I wanted to make is that this is a dialling down at this point in time of the Solar Savers program because of the budget uncertainty and the impact that on the budget that we've had because of COVID. It doesn't mean that in future years we can't dial it up. It's just, I think, a temporary reduction, but we need to make sure that the program keeps going along in some form so that in later years we can ramp it up again to support our residents and businesses putting solar panels on their roof.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour and against? We'll note that Councillors William and Greco voted in favour and Councillors Lassurf, Messina, McCarthy, Newton, Amir and Rennie voted against. Councillors, are there any further amendments? There being none, we'll resume debate on the motion which now reads including all of those amendments that were accepted. We've already heard from the mover, Councillor Amir, and the seconder, Councillor Lassurf. Are there any further speakers to the motion? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. It's great to finally get to the substantive motion and the budget itself. And I just hark back to the really positive comments that both Councillor Amir and Councillor Lassurf have made throughout this debate about the work of our officers, and I think the work of the people, the workers in this council who are doing it tough but doing a fantastic job in working out how we move forward, how we maintain service levels, how we keep people immunised, safe, connected, and you just have to look at the investments and in deployment and coordination that have happened in recent weeks, the extraordinary stories of innovation that have been happening to get a sense of what's ahead. And this is a budget that supports our community, supports our local businesses, supports our households to actually continue to be connected, continue to be supported, and enables us the flexibility, if required, if we see, for instance, an upsurge of pandemic activity again. We don't know what the future holds. This is a budget that provides us with the scope to be able to respond because we have thought through what resilience and recovery looks like in the city of Darebin. I have been a little bit concerned by some of the angles in the debate tonight that seem to suggest that you can somehow cut rates and somehow maintain service levels. That's simply not the case. The cost of a whole range of services is absolutely critical. The cost of to the council budget of actually maintaining employment levels. I just would remind councillors, in fact, that we're a council that proudly employs hundreds of local people. A significant percentage of our workforce are local residents. So when we make the investment to keep people employed, as this budget proposes to do, then we're also making an investment back into households in our own community, who then in turn spend money in the local economy, which supports local business. These things are not separate, they are deeply integrated, deeply entwined. So I'm incredibly excited about what this budget can do, despite the challenges that we face, because it is a budget that is highly responsive to the immediate challenges that we have, but also some of those longer challenges. It's a budget that maintains a commitment to strong action in the climate emergency, particularly for those who are most vulnerable in our community, and we've talked about that already. It also says if we are going to have challenges in terms of delivering large-scale capital projects in the next 12 months, what are the smaller scale and more immediate capital activity that needs to happen? And all the surveying work of our footpaths, the incredible planting activity, 6,000 trees and plants planted as part of this program is an extraordinary commitment and certainly is dearly needed in terms of reducing heat island effect and creating that positive buffer for our community, particularly vulnerable households. This is a budget that is well thought through, it is a responsible budget, and I really look forward to community feedback on it over coming months.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. I noticed is it only 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
2 minutes.
Okay, because I noticed 3 minutes before when Councillor McCarthy was speaking.
It should have been 2 minutes. I apologise if it wasn't, but you have 2 minutes.
I'll delete a minute off my speech.
Look, councillors, I think we're really going down the path of a completely irresponsible budget. It's not a responsible budget, it's an irresponsible budget. And I'll point out 5 reasons why One, let's be clear, we have a rate increase of 2%, the maximum allowed. We've gone for the maximum allowed when our revenue and rate charges have actually increased from 100 and...
Councillor Greco, some people are indicating they can't hear. Can you get your mic closer to you?
Yeah. The second point is that the fees and charges have also increased, and some have increased as much as 20%. If you look at dog registrations and cat registrations, in a particular time like this when everyone is hurting in the community, in this budget there is no rate relief. Let's absolutely be clear about it, and for individual the coronavirus crisis. Didn't have a rate rise, that there will be people off council stood down and things like that. There are other ways to fund the council.
Thank you.
Fund it. And I'll just finish on this point, is that there are other ways. We have large reserves in council, and the fact that this council has no borrowings whatsoever
Councillor Greco, I've called time.
That we take in regards to not increasing the rates
please, thank you.
To our rate.
I did give you some leeway to make up for the question at the beginning in relation to the time. Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I'll therefore put that to the vote. Nope, it's been amended. Any further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? Thank you. I note that that motion is carried with councillors McCarthy, Messina, Lesurf, Newton, Amir and Rennie voting in favour, and councillors Williams and Greco voting against. I would like to note at this point that this is a draft. It will go out for community consultation, and just as a word to those members of the gallery who are still here, quite specifically that we invite submissions. I'm sorry if you're disappointed that you weren't able to speak tonight. There is the hearing of submissions process, and there will be a special hearing of submissions committee at a meeting to be held at 6 p.m. on Thursday the 25th of June 2020, and we certainly look forward to seeing you there and hearing from you at that time. So thank you, councillors, and look forward to the process with this budget over the coming month. Meeting is closed.